start off by describing your background, sort of where you're from, family, where you grew up, that sort of thing?
Okay. I was born in 1950 in London. My mother was Jewish, working class, great. And my father was Nigerian, Catholic, and not too bad either. And they married, which is not very usual in those days. He got married on the 6th of June 1949, and I'm their firstborn, and I was born in December 1950. My mother was very worried that she couldn't have children because she hadn't got pregnant, and that was, which kind of made me laugh. Anyway, my father was very disappointed because he wanted a boy, and he got me. And I went to, I can't remember what. Anyway, my parents bought a house in Brixton, 1956. We were the first black family in the road. In fact, one of our neighbours didn't speak to us for I don't know how many decades. It's the kind of racism of it was just common, and you kind of put up with it. But I used to respond to those racists, and there were so many. And I'm not just talking about fascists. I'm talking about ordinary people who would make racist comments to me and to my brother. And I remember often being told to go back where I came from, and I would say with a very London accent, give me an halfpenny, mate, I'll get on a bus. And they'd be really shocked. That was good fun, sort of. Except that I did recognise racism. It wasn't, we didn't use that word. It wasn't the word. I think it was, we talked about colour prejudice, and I'm not even sure. But things happened, little things happened, being at school, and this is the early 1950s, and being asked to dance around the maypole leaf on Empire Day, which is 24th of May, is Empire. It's gone, so they've abolished it, thankfully. And one of the things we had to sing, or a song, was about being thankful for not being black, which, funnily enough, at age 4, I didn't agree with. And I remember being sent to the headmistress's office and, being punished for having views, which, when I look back, I'm very proud of. Mm-hmm. And what else can I say? I've got a brother. My brother's 2 years younger. So my father got his wish to have a son.
How did you become involved in politics? Was there a sort of turning point or an inspiration for you?
I'd always been political. I've always been political. I had, both my parents were quite political. Working class people, worked in factories, but they it's hard to describe, or even hard to remember because it's a long time ago, 60 years ago. I was encouraged to speak up for myself. Right. They were very clear that racism was wrong. We wouldn't have used that word, but that's the word I would now use. And my mother remembered the fascists being on the streets of London, the East End of London, where she grew up, when she was in fact, she remembers Moseley on the streets. Yeah. She was very feisty, my mum, and quite advanced politically. When I think about some of the rubbish that was being said by some mothers who had black children, she was she was respectful of our African heritage and my dad, and so I grew up respectful of her Jewish heritage and my father's African heritage, and both of them were political. They had things to say about the system, and it wasn't too bad. I mean, lots of things I hated about my dad, but he was a kind of sexist, expecting me to do the, wash the dishes and whatever, and my brother didn't need to do any of that stuff, and I disagreed with him. We had words often, so I kind of learnt to speak up for myself, and I was encouraged to. Both of my parents expected me to speak up for myself and not to endure racism. I remember telling my mother, this was when I was very young, and a teacher had a go at a black boy in the playground, and I can't remember the exact words that were spoken, but they were very racist. And I went home and I told my mother, and my mother she worked in a factory. She took time off work the next day and went to see the head teacher, and an apology. The teacher was made to give an apology for being racist, although it was called colour prejudice in those days.
And as you sort of grew into adulthood, was that the point when you started to forge your own personal politics, maybe
Yes.
separate from your parents?
Oh, absolutely. I read Marx. I don't know who introduced me to Karl Marx, and I lived near to the library. I don't know if you know Marx Park and Natchball Road.
Yeah.
Well, there's the Minute Library, which is now closed down. I spent most of my youth in that library. I hired, took out Das Kapital and other books. But I was seeking an explanation. I knew that there had to be an explanation for racism. And I wasn't aware of sexism at that time. I wasn't aware of it. I had no... on a personal level, I resisted every attempt to make me do feminine things. Right. It wasn't my cup of tea. But I wasn't aware of feminism. I just personally wouldn't submit to the rubbish of wearing bloody skirts and dresses, except I had to for school. Lots of things I had to do, but given a choice, I would be assertive of my personal stuff. I didn't want to, wear nail varnish and, that kind of stuff. So I didn't.
Okay. And is that what sort of, led you on to sort of feminist activism then?
No,
was there
no.
a particular point at which that
I did. There was a point in which I became a feminist,
right.
but it was much later.
Okay.
I observed the women's liberation movement, I don't think it was called the women's liberation movement at that time. I observed the protest, or at least the news of the process of women who invaded the Miss World competition. Right. And whilst I agreed with it, what I perceived was that there were mainly upper middle class white women. And that's not a crime. I didn't feel myself drawn to what they were saying. It wasn't relevant to my life as a working class girl, never mind a working class black girl, etc. So I didn't identify with feminism until later. I went to university as a mature student. My daughter's just done exactly the same thing. She had 3 children. I only had 2 at the time. And I was introduced by my tutors, almost all of them male, to feminism, and I was somewhat critical, and I distanced myself. It didn't seem to me to relate to my experience of my life, and I was still pretty, struck of being a Marxist in ways that wrongly saw feminism as bourgeois. Right. Clearly a lot of the women who were advocating feminism were, but that feminism itself need not have been, but right. The bits that I saw, and I think that would go for lots of young women today, that the bits that the media cover, the bits that get reported, can be somewhat narrow. Yeah. They don't represent all women. There's lots of, very nice women. Sandy Toksvig is a lovely woman and very funny. However, she's not necessarily a representative of all women, nor would she be engaging for many working class women, black or white. Yeah. So I didn't relate to feminism, but I did have for me, it was an extraordinary thing happened. I realised that I'd fallen in love with a woman, which had not occurred to me before. Obviously I knew the word lesbian, of course I did, but lesbians were white. I didn't, it didn't compute to me that I could be a lesbian. And, here's me married to a man and 2 small children, etc. Just, it wasn't something I had thought about, but when it struck me that that's what had happened, it was like the scales falling from my eyes. And I've been a lesbian ever since. Yeah.
All right,
and a feminist. That's what
right.
was then I could be a feminist.
That was the sort of turning point for you. And so after that point, how did your life change?
Oh gosh. Well, I was denied access to my children. Right. I mean, some terrible bloody things happened. And this is in Brighton. My daughter still lives in Brighton, and my grandchildren, and my ex-husband he's still in the house that we bought together. I identified and became familiar with a whole different world of being a lesbian feminist. It was very different. Everything, we critiqued everything. We didn't take anything as a given. So there'd be lots of discussions and arguments. It was great. It was absolutely wonderful. Fabulous for me. It was like being reborn. And some of that, I still feel tremendous pleasure and merriment in that. Though the hard thing was not having my children and having to fight to have access to my children. But in general, it felt like I'd come home. Somebody should have told me earlier that I was a lesbian, but there you go. I would still have children. I would still have had children. It's not like being a lesbian doesn't mean you don't want to have children. Yeah, so I became a feminist, and like many things in my life, I tend to do things pretty seriously. So I read lots. I critiqued gender. I indicated I didn't particularly think of gender when I was a child. I thought it was unfair that girls got lots of nasty things to do. I didn't even know about the fact that women weren't getting equal pay. Yeah. Things like that I didn't know. It wasn't it was just seen as a norm that of course women that men would be have higher status and all of the rest of it, and paid more and do certain jobs, and women were barred from jobs. And not until 1974 was the Sex Discrimination Act, and that by then I was already I was in my 20s, and I didn't realise how things had been before that. Yeah. For my mother's generation and hers.
Sort of leading up to the GLC, you're not quite there yet, but what sort of organising were you doing?
Oh, I was in some bloody awful groups, International Socialist and various other. Not for long. I was in them with the sort of zeal of youth, and then I became disenchanted with the Stalinism of them, the male leadership with the, men telling you what you ought to think and rubbish like that. So I did quite a lot of thinking. I do remember, I went on the, I think it was the last Aldermaston March. That would be 1967, 8 or 9, I can't remember. It might have been 1969. Went on the Aldermaston March. I went on lots of demos. So when Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia, when the Greek colonels took over, I was at Grosvenor Square at the big demonstration against the Vietnam War. So some of those significant kind of symbolic things of the late 70s I was involved in. Just as myself, I wasn't a member of any group. I would go to show solidarity. We did feel, and I think it was, I see lots of women doing it now in relation to Trump, of making a statement by being with other women and in this case it was being with other people because there were lots of men there as well. But one didn't want to appear to be agreeing by staying at home or, ranting at the television. One wanted to be out with others, making our voices heard to say that we disapprove. So I did a lot of, the stuff of the 60s. I definitely was at all the major demonstrations against repression, including that of the Soviet Union against the people of Czechoslovakia. So it wasn't all anti-capitalist. It was definitely anti-capitalist, but also anti-Soviet and any other kind of doctrinaire, monolithic parties.
And how was it that you came to then be, after this, involved in the GLC?
Well, I graduated, so I did a politics degree. I moved to London. I needed a job. I got a job, actually. I worked at Spare Rib. That was the first thing I did. Right. And I left there for political reasons. Oh, God, I don't really want to... I left there for political reasons, and I got a job. I think I was unemployed for about 6 weeks, but that's all. I think, or maybe it was as long as 2 months. And I signed on. I think it's the only time I've ever signed on in my life. I saw a job in Brixton, and it was to be a community accountant. Now, I had been I can't remember when I got married and going to university, I had been a tax officer. So I had gone to the Inland Revenue, got a job in the Inland Revenue, and was a lowly tax officer. I wasn't a tax officer higher grade, I wasn't an inspector, I was just and this is and I got pregnant and had children and came back to work, and we had 3 months maternity leave, and that was it. Wow. And then I had to come back to work because my then husband wasn't working. So I did, quite a lot of stuff. And looking after children. I didn't drive in those days. And towards the end of... When did I decide? Yeah, I think I decided that I would... Actually, I got pregnant again. And I had a termination. And I thought, I can't have 3 children under 5, which is what would have happened. I would be buried. I would be completely drowned. So I made a decision that I would have a termination, that I would apply for my driving test, and I would apply to go to university, and that's what I did. Right. That's when I went to university and then came out and various other things. So kind of I think I was 28 years old. Lots of things happen when a person is 28. Some significant things, and it was so for me. I wasn't consciously doing it. I didn't know about these phases of the moon or whatever the blasted things are. I just felt that I had been faced with some really important decisions, and I knew that there's nothing wrong with caring for children, but I knew that I could do more than only caring for children. I had a sense that I could make a broader contribution, but not as a wife. So I did go to university, and then after that I came to London, and I got a job at Lambeth Inner City Consultative Group as a community accountant, and I helped... this is after the 81 uprisings. Yeah? You'll have heard of the uprisings, sometimes called riots. Yeah, of course. Yes, and we called them uprisings, and rightfully, because this was the first generation who lots of, particularly black men, who were being the subject of the most appalling racism of the police, picking you up for walking down the street, and that would be a crime, and you could be beaten up, you could be accused of almost anything, robbing somebody's handbag, all kinds of lies. I'm not suggesting that every young man who was picked up and arrested was innocent, because a few of them were naughty boys, but no more so than white boys.
Yeah.
But all the boys were being targeted, etc. It was really awful. And why am I saying that? What am I talking about? So Brixton, yes. So that's what had been happening through the 60s and 70s. Yeah. And by the time we come to 81, some of those young men who had been born here, whose parents hadn't gone home, were being mistreated and had had enough. Right. And so, hence the uprising, hence the not putting up with the second-class status, which was real. Yeah. Well, I'd seen it, and I still feel, it still pains me. I'm not talking about windows being broken. I'm not pained by that. I'm pained by the criminalisation of a significant percentage of black boys for being black. And I'm still angry. I'm furious, actually. I still am. Yeah. And I want to change the world. That's the point. I don't want those young men, or any young men, to have to feel they have to fight and break things and destroy things. I think it's one of the reasons for when I came to the view about joining the GLC, I could see that the Ken Livingstone administration was doing something very different to what had been done previously. I knew about the councils which were being lauded as frugal and not spending money. These are Tory-run councils who wouldn't do anything for working class people. Nothing at all. And ironically, the Tories and Thatcher, and they used to talk about ratepayers, they meant householders, because tenants paid bloody rates, but that was always ignored. Yeah. The ratepayers for them were the people who lived in semi-detached houses and who voted Tory. And so I think by the time the Tories had got in for the second time, that will be about, what was that, 83, I considered rejoining the Labour Party, which I did. I'd been a member before when I lived in Brighton. I rejoined the Labour Party and decided, I saw a job in the newspapers, in The Guardian, and I thought it was perfect for me. It was for the GLC, in the women's unit, being team leader of equalities and grants monitoring. Now, the grants monitoring bit was all my financial stuff about, that I'd been doing for years, helping groups set up accounts and set up management committees and training them and that sort of stuff. And the other thing about equality was that the job entailed advising on, in the women's unit, on sexuality. So it was lesbian, that was the thing, it was lesbian, disabled, class wasn't there, but I brought it in. What was it? Lesbian, disabled, and ethnic minority. That's right. And that was GLC. That was back in '84. So I would think I was the first post holder. It was remember the GLC was demolished in 2 years later, but I did actually enjoy the work. Yeah. I had terrible bosses, and in fact, there were two black women in the group who were the most appalling racists. I'm not going to name them, but their memory lingers on. They were appalling towards me. I can't remember what they called me. I was something like half-breed or something like that. They're supposed to be leading on race, and they were homophobic as well. Apart from that, I think they're okay. And I didn't get much support from my bosses either. And
the role, can you just go into a bit more detail about the remit of it and what sort of groups you were supporting in your role?
Yeah. One of the good things that the GLC did do was to fund and support new groups of people who just tell me I'm overdrawn. New groups of people who hadn't had money before. So these are groups of working class women, black and white.
Yeah.
So the Asian women, they were supporting Hindu and Muslim and Jewish, and it was really amazing. The but was finance department wouldn't let the money out because there was a women's committee said yes. The women's unit had prepared the reports to justify why the money was going to be spent and how it was going to be spent and all of that stuff. And then finance would always find some reason. So when I got into role in '84, I came across these. I don't think that they were being deliberately kind of racist and sexist. But they were putting in place barriers that stopped these working class groups from getting the money. So I rather enjoyed this, but I talked with them, the finance people, to see if we could find something realistic, because of course groups did have to be accountable for spending public money. I mean, there's no argument about that, but don't set it up in such a way as the groups would never meet the criteria and therefore never get the money that the committee had approved. So I did some work and training with the groups as to how to be responsible, both because they were employing people, so they needed to know about employment law. There were they didn't have to be expert, but they needed to know about equal opportunities recruitment. There was a whole host of stuff that I could see, if we could empower them, if we could share it, they could take the money and use it and be accountable for it. So I did actually enjoy that work. I really found it satisfying, because it felt like bringing together my skills of knowing about financial accountability and how to employ and things around employment law and helping them to achieve their objectives.
Were there any groups that you can remember specifically that you helped to do that?
Oh God,
Any
yes.
names?
I think it was called Ackroyd Nursery. They're in Ackroyd. I think it's Ackroyd. Where in South London. I had to go and see them and work with them, particularly around the requirement in relation to lesbians, because they were a bit perplexed of what they should be doing. So showing them about discrimination and what they might do if there were two lesbian mothers in the group, and not excluding them. So they did. I wasn't. And this is one of the debates I had about being pragmatic. Certain groups, it's reasonable to say a religious group, that you want them to do at least a token. Yeah. You don't expect them to be on the forefront of the struggle for sexual liberation. It's just not. That's not reasonable. But you do want them to be willing to not sack somebody if they come if they come out, that sort of thing. Yeah. And I did. So it was pragmatic. It was, and that I enjoyed that. I mean, it's something I had to develop because it wasn't there. There was some women in the unit who were more, what's the word? Sort of doctrinaire. Who, if you had a policy, it should apply to everybody. Yes, but not in the same way. Yeah. It needed to be proportionate. So I enjoyed kind of developing that stuff and doing it. And I did have some difficulty with the two homophobic black women who were in my team, and in the end I moved away from managing them.
Right. Were there any groups that never got funding?
I can't think of any that didn't. I mean, maybe I never saw them. I only saw the groups that had been funded, because it was making sure they met their terms and conditions of grant and things like that. So I don't really know. I can't think of. No, I don't know how I would have known. Yeah. There were other teams in the unit that would have encouraged groups to join, and my role was once they had been approved, then monitoring. So it was equalities and grants monitoring. The monitoring was, once they'd been given the money, how was it spent? But I had to, as I've indicated, I had to work quite hard to make sure they got the money once committee had approved them.
During your sort of overall time in the GLC, are there any sort of highlights, any projects or anything you're involved in that you're particularly proud of, or a highlight for you?
No, we were... All of the women in the unit worked very hard. We had different facets to do. Mine was no more important than anybody else's. You know, it was exciting for me working inside local government, which I hadn't done before. I do. The last bit of the GLC was interesting because the GLC had been abolished by Thatcher, and by then I was a councillor in Lambeth. And what did we do? It had been agreed that by I think was it 13 of the Lambeth, I don't know, maybe it was 15, I can't remember exactly how many, but councils in London had agreed, the Labour councils, bar one, had agreed that they would carry on funding a core of the GLC once it had been abolished. So all the radical bits, so the race unit, the women's unit, I can't remember the names of all of them. I remember the race and the women's unit. And in fact, I became the chair of the body, the London Strategic Policy Unit it was called. So what I am proud of is that body created Black History Month, because we didn't have Black History Month in the United Kingdom. It wasn't my idea, but I supported it and made it happen, and because I was also at that point I was leader of Lambeth Council, so Lambeth did stuff that other councils didn't do. So, since the question was about being proud of whatever, I think that the funding for so many women's groups. And especially working class women's groups, that's the bit I'm proud of. And that wasn't my decision, you know. All I can say is I and others helped support those groups so that they could know how to be accountable for the money and realise the potential that they had in their communities by... I mean, if you provide... I mean, you have to remember how hostile the Tories were, both in the press, Margaret Thatcher, etc., of us having creches and childcare. Now, the current Tory government is talking about childcare because they take it as a given. When we first were doing this, they were hostile. And we did, I mean, lots of things that the GLC did were ridiculed in the media and are now the norm. They're not loony left anymore. They're the norm. But they don't. I mean, it would be quite nice to have some acknowledgement. I don't mean I personally. I mean all of us who were involved in trying to be more inclusive, trying to be fairer to everybody, and and include all communities.
Were there any difficulties or things that maybe you think could have been done differently, looking back over your time there?
What could have been done differently? I don't know. I mean, it was very painful. It was very painful working there because, as I say, there was the homophobia. My two bosses, who I shan't name, but were absolutely appalling to me. I think because I was out as a lesbian, I was a counsellor, I was Jewish, black. You know, I ticked all the boxes. And I wasn't intimidated by them. Mm-hmm. However appalling sometimes they were to me. And they really were. Anyway, that's called life.
Do you feel like the GLC as an institution, you know, there was anything that could ever be done about those sorts of working relationships or where things weren't really...
I suspect had there not been so much pressure and hostility from outside, then it could have been that the women's unit and maybe some other parts of the GLC would have been, less harassed.
Right.
They were always under pressure. They was always under scrutiny. The media did not like Ken Livingstone. There was huge amounts of criticism and pressure and hostility and lots of the things he did. And when I say he, because there were lots of people there who did some bloody good work. Not just him, but he happened to be the leader and supported those things happening. And if he hadn't supported them, all the good work from the officers wouldn't have happened. So, you know, he has his place, but I don't want to elevate him above others. There were lots of good councillors. John MacDonald was a councillor there. Who else? Reg Race. I mean, there were a whole host of lovely, but Deirdre Wood. Good people, really good people who I don't have to agree with all of them on everything, but I felt that they cared passionately about the diverse people of London. I remember one time, I can't remember what I was doing, but I came into the town hall, into County Hall, the one that's now a hotel, and looked around, and it was packed with ordinary people, ordinary working class people, black and white, you know. It was, and I was thinking, you know, 10 years ago, it would not have been the case.
Is that yours?
Yeah. It wouldn't have been. Stop harassing me. It wouldn't have been. The only. The working class people would be inside town halls to pay their rates. That's it.
Yeah. And
occasionally cleaning the floor. But what the Ken Livingstone administration did was to make town halls, services, local government services, relevant and transparent and joyous even. Really, and it shouldn't be knocked. I mean, what the Tories are doing now and have been since they've been in power is to close down every service that people need, and to privatising services. How many? If we had a properly free press, the media will be looking at who are the shareholders of the companies who've got the contracts to do the services that councils used to do.
Yeah.
People are making profit out of suffering and you know, oh, God, it makes me, I'm a bit cross.
When did you first learn that the GLC was to be abolished?
Oh, gosh.
What was your reaction?
Oh, hostility. And needless to say. Hostility, and I used the law to find ways round. I remember Section 137 and 142 of the 1972 Local Government Act was that woman tried to stop. It was discretionary expenditure. Yeah. The product of was it 2p in a pound rate that could be used for radical things. We wouldn't call them radical today. At the time they were called radical, but you know, doing all kinds of things that for benefit of working class people. And Thatcher tried to stop. I mean, it was usually because I can't remember which councils would take out injunctions and various other things. So huge amounts of bloody public money being spent on lawyers, stopping benefits to working class people. Right. And I'm still cross about it. I'm still disgusted, and I am horrified how little our media, our supposed free press, are saying about the real impact of cuts on. So the rates have been cut, and the people who benefit are the people in big houses. Yeah. The rich benefit from low rates. Well, what are they called? Them? Community charge, council tax. It's called, I think. And when it was higher, there was more money that could be spent for people who really needed it. And I think it's called socialism.
Yeah. And by the time that the GLC was abolished, were you in Lambeth by that point?
Yeah, I was a councillor.
You were a councillor at that point?
And still working.
Oh, you were working okay.
Yeah, I was working.
Okay.
So the GLC was abolished on the 31st of March 1986.
Right.
I became a councillor on the 1st of August 1985.
Right.
So it's not a huge
Just
amount of time.
Just a little
bit but
of overlap.
Yeah, and I was so. I became a councillor. That's right, and I was party to the discussions about what was going to happen for Lambeth and other councils once the GOC was abolished. So we were meeting to plan how we could keep the radical bits, which is what we did.
So
but only for 2 years.
Was that the last few months of the GLC? What was sort of happening? You were involved in those sorts of discussions.
Yes.
Is that how you remember the last sort of?
Yeah, whilst trying to make sure that we got as much money out of the building as possible. So those women's centres who were trying to buy their properties or build nurseries, etc. So my role was to make sure the money got out to them and they were spending it as they needed, because we still had to be accountable for public money.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not. We were not giving people money to put in their own pockets. We were giving money so that there could be benefit for communities who needed it. And and it was my job in terms of grants monitoring is monitoring how they spent the money and helping them get the money out and things like that. It was good fun. I was quite busy, and I had a lot of energy in those days. I'd be working all day. I think I usually worked about something like 8 in the morning. I get into work at 8 and I'd leave at 6, and then I go to meetings. It was great.
How did you feel immediately after the end of the GLC?
Well, we had the LSPU, the London Strategic Policy Unit, so I was deeply disappointed, of course, and I had no income because I'd lost my job, and I couldn't work for another. What had she done? She being Thatcher, stopped you being a councillor and an officer.
Right. So
I couldn't work. I had a choice: being a councillor, in other words, doing my democratic duty, or having an income. Right. So I had to. Oh God, it was awful. It took me some time to pay off my debts.
Yeah. How do you feel like it affected you being involved in the GLC? Looking back at it now, in terms of.
I thought it was a tremendous opportunity to learn things, to be involved. I mean, I was friends with John McDonnell and Ken Livingstone and Valerie Wise, and most of those, most of those people who are still making headway today.
Yeah. Time-wise, how are we looking?
Oh, okay.
Got maybe just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
What would you say were, just GLC-wise, the sort of biggest successes or maybe failures as well for GLC?
Biggest successes, let me see. I think making local government interesting and relevant to working class people.
Yeah.
Because it hadn't been before.
Yeah.
And councils are still struggling. I mean, it wasn't just the GLC, Manchester City Council, Kirklees. There were a few others, but we were politically similar, and we wanted to make our town halls and our council services relevant to all the people, not just the ones with particular loud voices.
Yeah.
That's what was achieved, and it was good. Trying to get relevant services for children's services. Things were really awful. They're not much better now, except in principle people kind of know that they should be more inclusive, but the money's not there to do the things.
Yeah.
But we've won the arguments about inclusion. That's one.
And failures, do you think?
Failures. I don't know. Not sure. Did I have any? No, I don't think. I can't. I'm not aware.
Yeah.
None come to my mind, and I haven't in the last, whatever it is, 35 years, thought that was a failure.
Yeah.
I have thought, I wish we were still doing that.
What do you think would have happened had it not been abolished?
Oh, it would have gone from strength to strength. I think it would have. There would have been less pressure.
Yeah.
We could have taken things more slowly because we had very little time. And why hasn't there been an indictment of the waste of public money of abolishing the GLC and then creating another one, the Greater London Authority? I mean, that cost millions of pounds. Why has there been no indictment of the Tories for wasting public money?
Yeah.
They talk about us wasting money. We were trying to ensure that working class people, black and white, benefited. So actually one of the other things I must say was some really important work around disability.
Yeah.
Was done at the GLC. Some good work around sexuality. There was good work around women's issues and ethnic minority presence. There were lots of important things. Some of that work around equal opportunity recruitment. It was the GLC led it. Now, in fact, it was one of the people I'm really should name, and that's Herman Ousley, now Lord Ousley. Mm. He was head of the ethnic minority unit, and he introduced and demanded or led some really important equal opportunities procedures and practices so that we weren't just getting the same narrow cohort of white university-educated men deciding everything and running everything. So I thought there were some great things that were done at the GLC. Even if, for me, it was quite painful because I was being bullied. I mean, there's all kind of stuff happening. But putting that aside, if you look objectively at what the GLC did, I think it was amazing. Great.
Sort of final question, really. For young people today, wanting to bring about social change, would you still advocate the sort of model you did?
I don't. Look, change can be in lots of different places.
Yeah.
This happened to be local government.
Yeah.
I mean, change needs to happen in workplaces.
Yeah.
On the street, in everywhere.
Yeah.
And local government is a place, but I wouldn't want to say it's the place any more than, factories and offices are the place. Everywhere should be places where people make a useful contribution in their work and in their community.
Yeah.
And they, from each, according to their ability. We can't all be the same, neither should we be. We have different abilities to do things, different strengths and interests, and that's what I love about socialism. Some really important things have been done by socialists in the name of socialism, and I'd like to see more of it.
Fab. We'll end it there then, yeah? Thank you so much, Linda. That was brilliant. Where are we now? I think if I do...